Back to Greenwood Surgery now, and here's our steering group's report on the practice questionnaires, these little leaflets that are given out to patients so they have a chance to say what they think of any particular general practice. Here's a section about the PCT providing Greenwood Surgery with equal opportunities. It says the PCT must accept that it can no longer regard Greenwood Surgery as second-class fodder. By providing us with minimal finance, our patients have the right to demand this equality. For our part, we shall strive to increase our already high scores, but parity of funding, in other words, our rightful share of the cake from the PCT, is an essential ingredient in achieving. Here's evidence of how poorly funded we are at the moment. This is a tax rebate from the Inland Revenue in recognition of our woeful income. And here are details of the seniority payment rules. As I said, I'm to receive no payment from July 05 until September 06. Comparing this with the funding available to the PCT-run surgery, we see that Harrison admits to burning his way through over 300,000 in the first 6 months alone. But not to worry, because despite all this investment, the number of patients fell significantly during its first 6 months of operation. Here's a letter to the MP, Marc Francois, which compares the spend on the two surgeries. The disparity in terms of pounds per patient per year is remarkable. One of the most interesting points to come out of this saga is the complete lack of effective patient representation. What we have here is a petition with thousands of signatures on it. And yet the so-called Patient and Public Involvement Forum totally ignored it. When this organisation was called on to advise on reinstating Greenwood Surgery as an NHS practice, it gave it the thumbs down without contacting a single patient. It made no attempt whatsoever to contact the patient steering group, then the patient's action group. It just did what the PCT told it to do. At that time we received hundreds of letters from patients. I've just put a very few out here, and they wrote both to me and to all sorts of people, the Department of Health, the MP, the Strategic Health Authority, the PCT, the Ombudsman, the Health Commissioner, etc., etc. And there was one point in common. They were all referred back directly or indirectly to the PCT, the very organisation they were complaining about. There's just no way of dealing with a PCT that's gone off the rails. And needless to say, I ended the letter with a mention of the budget. That was back in 2004 though, and I recently wrote to Marianne Ketley to ask if things had improved. We recently had our QOF visit, our quality visit, and a very charming patient representative turned up. He looked at the written statement we gave him and talked to the staff and generally busied himself about. He took a good look at our collection box. He looked at the patient steering group notice board. And he looked behind the scenes at sites like this, the patient's notes in cardboard boxes, because the PCT asked if they could remove the filing cabinets at one stage, and we said yes, providing you give them back, and then they refused to give them back. And he saw all this and took it all in. And he did absolutely nothing about it. Nothing has happened since he visited the practice. He was a very genial chap, but as a patient representative, somewhat lacking. And if we go back to our improving practice questionnaire, we had a visit from 2 PCT non-executive directors to discuss this. And they made it clear this year and last that there was to be no mention of anything embarrassing like finance. Now you might assume that people like this would have the best interests of the patients at heart. And yet what they were clearly saying was, if you say anything remotely embarrassing, you won't get paid. All this would never have happened in the days of the community health councils. They were truly independent, and they genuinely put the patient's interests first. If you have patients' representatives who don't even make a token gesture of representing the patient's interests, what's the point? And so to sum up, we've seen the weird situation with regard to general practice in Southwold and Ferrers. We've seen the odd and seemingly irrational way the practices have been cited. And we've seen the bizarre goings-on at St Peter's, the old workhouse. Much of the site dilapidated and outdated, which is why the PCT made the decision to move on. And yet parts of the site have been refurbished at enormous expense. We're told that a 6-figure sum was spent on doing up the old cafe. No expense was spared on professional artists, nor on the video that was made to celebrate this venture. And while the PCT said, oh, don't worry about the money, it all comes out of a different pot, it basically all comes out of our pockets. Or rather, your pockets. I got a refund. And a lot of us are saying, well, should we really be spending money on things like that when we're denying patients basic medical care? Isn't this a case of skewed priorities? As you probably gathered, I feel quite strongly about all this. So, what are the perpetrators? Well, the Chief Executive of the Strategic Health Authority, Hannah Flynn, has already gone. And so has Brooks. And, in my opinion, neither of them should ever work in the NHS again. Harrison is still with us, and so is Plumridge, the chairman of the PCT. They're due, we think, to go in October, and again, neither of them should work in the NHS, nor, in my view, in any form of healthcare in the future. People who are prepared to use patients as cannon fodder should not be employed in any capacity in any form of healthcare. There should be accountability. People who waste public funds should be held responsible. This PCT may be about to be consigned to the history books, but it still has a great deal to answer for. And finally, I think the policy of moving failed NHS managers on from one place to another should cease. It doesn't solve problems, it just creates new ones elsewhere. So there you have it. What I've shown you has, for the most part, been what is visible from the outside, and there, of course, it's rumour and innuendo. I've also been looking, however, at what goes on behind the scenes, and there we have uncovered some good evidence of some very dodgy practices. I've asked the Strategic Health Authority on more than one occasion to investigate, and it's refused. But realistically, any investigation that took place now would have to include the role of the Strategic Health Authority in this saga. What the PCT and the Strategic Health Authority have failed to recognise is that when you discriminate against a practice, you also discriminate against the patients of that practice. We GPs are not magicians. We can only provide the service we're funded to provide. If Knight Bevan could see what's going on here in Southwold and Ferrers, he'd be spinning in his grave. When the PCT was set up, we hoped it would rationalise services and bring about improvements, instead of which we've got a legacy of ill-feeling and debt. But enough of all that, I'm off to polish my Porsche Carrera GT, so thank you for listening.